Mr. Thomas Kaw, a self-made multimillionaire, had recently bought Golden Plate Bistro. Determined to understand the treatment of customers, especially those who seemed out of place in a fancy restaurant, he came up with a bold plan. Disguised as a homeless man, wearing a worn-out brown jacket and scuffed sneakers, he entered the restaurant to experience it firsthand. As he entered, the restaurant's high-end atmosphere hit him. The elegant chandeliers, polished wooden floors, and fine decor stood in stark contrast to his ragged appearance. He took a seat in the corner, waiting for a server to acknowledge him. Soon, a waitress named Margaret approached, giving him a dismissive glance. "Can I help you?" she asked sharply. "I'd like to see the menu," Thomas replied calmly. Margaret raised an eyebrow, sneering. "I don't think this is the place for you," she said. "We don't serve your type here." "I can pay for the food," Thomas said, trying to remain polite. Margaret scoffed. "With what?" "Don't waste my time." Some diners glanced over at the commotion. Thomas asked to speak with the manager. "No," Margaret snapped. "Get up or I'll call security." The manager, Frank, overheard and stormed over. "What's going on here?" he barked. "This man is causing trouble," Margaret said, looking at Thomas with contempt. "I only asked to see the menu," Thomas explained. Frank, ignoring him, growled, "Leave now or I'll call the cops." Realizing there was no point in arguing, Thomas stood up, turning to leave, but not before catching the curious glances of diners watching the scene unfold. Once outside, Thomas called Mr. Garrison, the previous owner of the bistro. "We need to meet. There's something you need to see." The next morning, Margaret and Frank were back at work, casually chatting in the staff room. Margaret boasted about how she dealt with the beggar. "People like him shouldn't even be here," she sneered. But little did they know, Thomas had already returned, this time in his usual sharp suit, walking in with Mr. Garrison. When they entered, the room went cold. Staff members froze. Margaret and Frank's faces drained of color as they recognized Thomas. "Good morning," Thomas said calmly. "Welcome, sir," Frank stammered, scrambling to hide his nervousness. "How can we assist you?" Thomas ignored the question, turning to Mr. Garrison. "Shall we begin?" Mr. Garrison nodded and clapped his hands, signaling the staff. "Everyone meet Mr. Kaw. He is the new owner of Golden Plate Bistro." A collective gasp filled the room. Margaret's mouth hung open, but no words came out. Frank's smile dropped, replaced by fear. Thomas took a deep breath. "Yesterday, I came in dressed as someone who didn't look like your typical customer. I wanted to see how people are treated here." His piercing gaze landed on Margaret and Frank. "What I saw was unacceptable." Margaret began to stutter an apology, but Thomas raised his hand, silencing her. "You didn't even realize what you did because you didn't care. You judged me by my appearance." Frank stepped forward, trying to save face. "Mr. Kaw, this was just a misunderstanding," Thomas interrupted sharply. "No. As manager, your job is to ensure all customers are treated with respect, regardless of how they look. You failed at that." Turning to Mr. Garrison, Thomas said, "I think it's time for you to speak." Mr. Garrison stepped forward. "Margaret, Frank, your actions go against everything this restaurant stands for. Effective immediately, you're both terminated." Gasps filled the room. Staff members exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret's eyes welled with tears, and Frank's face turned crimson with humiliation. Thomas addressed the remaining staff. "Let this be a lesson. Everyone deserves dignity. If we're to succeed, we must treat every customer with respect." As Thomas and Mr. Garrison walked out, Margaret and Frank stood frozen, the weight of their actions settling in. For the staff and diners who witnessed the scene, one thing was clear: justice had been served, and that was the end of the story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more thrilling stories.